Architecture is really the art and science of turning fiction into fact.
Sometimes kind of real architectural life interferes with intellectual architectural life.
There is no such thing as architecture.
Hello everyone, this is Vikram Prakash and you are listening to Architecture Talk. As usual, each episode we try and have a conversation with a contemporary thinker on issues of architecture and architectural thinking. And in doing so, our goal is to interrogate the status quo, to invite people who are interested in the broad discourse of architecture to consider what it is today, what it has been in the past, and what it might be in the future, with the idea of advancing the frontier of architectural thinking. And this is certainly the case with my guest today, my friend Javier Sánchez, who is an architect from Mexico, who has been practicing already for the last 20 years there, and who is, one would describe as being mid-career, a track record of a highly celebrated and awarded architectural practice, but who is in significant ways rethinking his practice, rethinking about what it means to be an architect today, what it means to be an architect today in Mexico, what it means to practice architecture with the questions and crises of the world today. He is rethinking practice with such questions in mind, not in a general way, but in a very specific way, as connected with his own life, with his own family, and his own interest in things like running ultra marathons. All right, let's pick up the conversation. Welcome to Architecture Talk.
Thank you, Vikram. I'm really happy to be here.
Okay, so the question I was asking was, there's a complexity to being in the world and performing in the world, given the legacy of fathers who have done great things and performed well in the world, given the legacy of masters from the past in the profession like Corbusier, who have done well and performed well in the world. And given the sort of centrality of the successful West and the great traditions and institutions that we admire. Given all of these, there's always some anxiety about our own performance, right? As sons, as people from the third world, as architects working in the shadows of masters. What is your sense of your productive effort as an architect? No, we'll come to your actual design, but as your effort in life, is it a work of trying to gain recognition at home and abroad? Or, obviously not only to do that, but at some level, is that important?
It's a great question because I'm always being autocritical, and I think that I've reached a point in my life. Right now I'm 48 years old, and I started early. I began building very early. I was fortunate enough to do that, to be pressured probably to do that because I got married young and had to maintain a family. So I was there at the rising day, of my beginning of profession. I did not wake up late.
That's good. Not like Khan, who woke up late, yes.
Well, in that respect, I hope that someday I will wake up level, again. But what I mean is, I really had no time to think. I just had to begin walking and then running, and I think that I am satisfied with what I've done up to now because I can go back in time and see buildings that I've built 20 years before and meet the people that live there and enjoy a conversation about their life in that place. And I think that's what we do. We provide a service. That's what gives me most satisfaction. Today there are so many ways that you can become famous. You can have your work published even if it's not built. And I think that time has to prove you have done something good or maybe not. But it's only time, you know. Architecture is I think, about time. And I think time, in my case, is 20 years, which is what I've been doing. For 20 years I've been working, and it's maybe not a lot of time, but already people are getting an award for something that has not even been built. So what does time mean in that respect? When I began, when I decided to become an architect, because I fought with that, I struggled with that, as you said. I struggled a long time with that, actually. When I did decide to become an architect, I had already negotiated with myself that I would do my best, and that would be enough. And that being the son of my father, of Felix Sánchez, and the grandson of Felix Sánchez, my father's father,
Who's also an architect.
who's also an architect, and was able to build one of the University City buildings, for example. I mean, just to mention, you know, that connection to the modern building of our country. I was going to do my part in my context, on my own terms, in a different Mexico than the one they lived. My Mexico is so different than the one they had to deal with. And the reality is that you cannot live your life tormented by the shadow of something that is not real. Our work is so tangible. We can really build. We can write about it. We have things that are coming out of that. That if that is not enough, then what is? No? Then I think the rest is just an illusion. And today, at my age, I can step back, escape, be in Seattle for 10 weeks, and see my own practice from a distance, work from here like if I was there, but at the same time work from here as if I am here, you know, which are amazing opportunities in the world we live today. That's our world.
Sure.
The world of airplanes, of internet, no, of.
I mean, one of the things I know about you, we were discussing this earlier, is that in between you were teaching, I think, in Kansas State University, Manhattan.
Correct.
And that was a very transformative event and time for you. For some reason, you know, you completely changed your outlook to life and architecture. Can you tell us a little bit like what happened and why that was?
I think I was at the point in my life where I wanted to.
So this was 10 years ago?
This was in 2013.
Oh, not long ago,
So
yeah.
I was at a point in my life where my daughters were at the right age to be able to cut away from their schools and move to another country for a year. I was recovering from a crisis that I had, you know, the typical midlife crisis where suddenly you don't know where you want to go. I was already back from that. So I kind of thought it was like a great idea to reconnect with my family before they each took on their own way, because that happened immediately after, you know, it was like the last opportunity. And at the same time, for me, it was like, okay, so what do you want to do after? I'm always thinking about Lucan and what you said, how he began late. He began early, but he began warming up the machine, right? And
Right.
then when he turned 50, he began doing this amazing work that I still think he's one of the most important architects of our time.
Did you have a crisis in belief in your practice at that time?
I still do. I think our practice is guided by principles that are not necessarily the best. And it's not my practice, it's their practice of architecture. It has become a business.
But that's part of your reputation. You are a sort of developer architect.
It is. So it's a paradox, because at the same time, since we are our own clients, we can decide what we want to do and what we don't want to do, especially the second. But at the same time, we have to produce the results. So it's not so easy. It's not clear or I would say transparent in the way that you have to negotiate. And I think life is a negotiation, and I'm not bad with that. I think it's more that I would like to be able to help more. I can continue doing what I do, and I think a lot of people will be probably happy living in the buildings that we do, but I think that's probably not enough.
You mean like socially more responsible?
I'm talking about socially, I'm talking about our responsibility towards the planet. I'm talking about architecture as a means, as a tool of transformation, not only for the capital, but for humans, and in that respect, I think...
Do I hear you think that those are two ideas incompatible, capital and humans?
I think we definitely are a species that is battling with a big paradox of what is best for humans and what is best for the capital. And we're kind of wanting always to walk on both territories. I sometimes think it's not possible, and that it's just like a catch-22 situation where the only thing we're doing is feeding capital. And by doing that, we are not achieving our fullest potential as a species. And I think that in my case as an architect, this is a huge task. I'm not saying I should take that responsibility on my shoulders alone, but I think that I can still do more. I think some of my colleagues, young colleagues, are doing great work working with proposing infrastructure in Mexico City for collecting water, for distributing water in a more democratic way. Things that I think are part of architecture. And beyond the fame of architects, it's the power of architects to transform, to inform politicians towards things that have a biggest return on humanity, and not such a big return perhaps on investment,
Sort of a return that's more socially constructive. But one of the things you told me was, after this time in Manhattan, you really sort of transformed your physical being. You lost a lot of weight and you got into running. So I'm trying to understand that and trying to see how that connects to architectural thinking, or if at all.
It definitely does. I think that we all begin. It's all about energy, I was not energetic anymore. I felt dragged down. I felt tired. I felt pressed by my own system. But I was not really wanting to change because we have a difficulty changing. So I have two actors of change. 2 actresses, let's say.
Your daughters.
Which pushed me to a limit. And I suddenly realized that I was able to change, that I was able to be more energetic, that I was able to think more clearly, to be more critical. And we began talking a while ago about looking at the world through my father's eyes. Mm-hmm. And now it's funny because I see the world through my daughter's eyes, which is a beautiful way of seeing the world, because I am fortunate enough to say that they are activists, and within that activism that they have embraced, they have made me question what I do, and that is why I am still in this transformation that, yes, it began with a midlife crisis, it continued with an escape and an idea of reuniting my family. And eventually it changed me from not only the interior, that's a longer process that I'm undertaking, but from the exterior I began getting more energy from exercise, eating better, being healthier. And all of that connects to your brain. In the end, I think what is amazing is that once you heal yourself physically, you begin to heal yourself emotionally, and probably you can do it the other way around, or either or. But in my case, it's been driving me more and more towards an emotional state where I am in a moment where I would like to direct my second part of life, the second part of the football game, the second half. Second and last half, we were talking about Master Doshi and his 90 years old, the lucid mind he has. So I think if in the 90th minute we can arrive with that mind and be productive, and we can be able to look back at like he is able to look back at what he's done, but we are still being part of what is happening. I think we have an amazing opportunity to share. I think there is a loss between generations today.
Yes, for sure.
People are not talking. Same generation people talk, but cross-generationally it becomes difficult.
It does.
So I think if masters of age are valued, it's because they can see the world from a bigger distance. They have been in the world longer. And I think that's what is our responsibility now, is how we build a better world with what we have learned up to now, but also helping the generations that are younger, that have all of the energy, but maybe not the experience.
This is very utopian thinking. You want us to be able to talk to a generation far ahead of us and the generation below us.
I do. It's
You're an extreme thinker and an extreme runner. Is there a connection between those two things?
I am an extremist. I unfortunately cannot do things unpassionately and on a kind of so-so way.
Tell us a little bit about your running. You do this extreme running.
Well, I began running a couple of miles, almost bursting into disaster in Manhattan, Kansas, that first day that I was challenged by my daughters. And eventually, today I am preparing for a 100K ultramarathon in the Andes at the 12,000 feet elevation in Peru with 18,000 feet of negative elevation change.
Why? That's pretty extreme.
I want to be able to see my limits. If I am able, I think anyone is able of doing something. If it's like a dream, no? So how do you get to that dream? What does it take? How can you do that and still be an architect? Is it part of architecture or not? You were asking. Definitely, I connected to architecture because I was, for the first time, in a mountain, climbing a mountain, hiking, running, when I was 45 years old. So that was 3 years ago. That made such a profound impact on the way I see the world. Added to my transformation, I kind of realized that we need to include nature more into our work, into our cities.
Describe to me, you're at 14,000 feet in the Andes. I can say sitting here, we should integrate nature more into architecture. That's not the same thing as what you are trying to convey to me, that feeling, if you would, about you have run 67 kilometers already and you're at 14,000. What does nature look and feel like from that point?
I think at some point I will go into a state of hallucination. That's very possible that will happen. But while I am lucid, I think what will happen to me is that I will see the world from the perspective of the chasquis, the chasquis runners from Peru. They would take messages up from the coast to the great Inca emperor.
I see.
And they would do it in relays. But if you think of Mexico's ancestral culture, the Tamemes runners, they would do the same. They would bring messages from the coast to the high valley of Mexico City, 6,000 feet of elevation change, and they would do it running. But also Spartans.
Yes, Spartans were big runners.
And it's been in our it's part of our evolution. We are because we run. That's a fact. We began our evolution from the Homo erectus, for example. We won over them because we were runners, because we were able to hunt without any tools, just by chasing a deer down. A group of men, collectively, men and women, running for their life, but for their food as well. And that made our brains grow bigger, and we were able to survive. And I think that today we are so far, but so close to that, because our DNA is the same, but we are sitting in a chair, and we're not really doing anything to exercise our body, and I think, there's this Roman saying, the mente sana en corpore sano, no? A healthy brain in a healthy body. So when I'm running in the Andes, what I will think is how architecture became out of a forest, out of shelter, out of a change in climate between the day and night, how it feels for you to suddenly have the day end and you have to continue running through the night and see the day rise again.
You run through the night?
You begin at 5 p.m.
Yeah.
and you end 36 hours later. So there is no break from that. You can begin thinking of our ancestors that were running at the same time.
I mean, that must affect your state of mind.
It can produce hallucination. That's what some runners have expressed. I have never been in that state before. I've run 50 miles. That's been my longest run. So this one is going to be beyond that. But you are at your peak for running when you are 24 and when you are 64.
64.
Correct. A 64-year-old can outrun an 18-year-old. Obviously, there are people that run faster, and so we cannot generalize. But in general, you can be at your peak when you're at 64. It's not only the Beatles song. It's also true that your body is at its peak for doing something that maybe a lot of people consider is not possible for older people. So in that way, I'm looking forward to that. I'm still 18 years before, no? And I still have a lot of miles to run. And another way that I love connecting architecture to running is this weekend I was able to run 15 miles within Seattle. It was a rainy day, but I was able to run in amazing places, Ravenna
Ravenna
Park.
Park, yes.
That's such a beauty. I mean, you can say anyone can visit those places by walking. I agree. I don't think it's about running. I think it's about moving. I think it's about taking distance, being able to forget about internet, being able to forget about music.
No, that's all true, but I think there is something about running. I mean, I have done some running, not anywhere near as extreme as you, but sometimes on a good run, you just get into a zone and you can just keep going and going and going and going.
When you get there, it's this state of happiness.
It is. But I always thought it was just endorphins.
Obviously, that's the chemical activation of your brain. But at the same time, it's a complete feeling of satisfaction, don't you think? I mean, you feel you're one with the world.
And is that, do you think, the purpose of architecture also, to sort of create that oneness with the world?
I think that's what we have to strive for. That's what we have to run for.
Are you succeeding in your work in that?
I think that I am still far from that. I like to talk to my clients and hear them enjoying their buildings, but I like more talking to the people that are not my clients and telling me they enjoy a building, because your clients, I mean, they are kind of induced to they invested in that, right? But what about anyone?
No, but people liking a building, is that the same as sort of experiencing some kind of a meta state of the kind that one achieves in running?
If you think of my experience when I went to Japan and when I entered into that first temple, first time in my life, and how that literally drove me to tears, architecture is capable of doing that. The question is, how do we achieve that? And I think we don't have to think about that. I think we have to do our best and think about humans. What does a human need? Try to think how we can give that to them. At the same time, we're just providing a frame. People will have to live their own lives. But if that frame creates that state of well-being for them, you know, when you go into a room and you see this chair, part of the architecture, for example, in an old colonial building, where the chairs are part of the window. So the chair window kind of
Right, built in, yeah.
that you can also see in the Fisher House by Louis Kahn. He has this desk, window, chair, corner window. I mean, what is it? It's all of them, right? You could sit down in that window space and just say, wow, this is the place. No, this is the place of the house. And I think those subtleties, I think, are what is really important. And it's not the biggest of buildings. The biggest of buildings have so much problems with them, don't you think? I mean, scale-wise, money-wise, the power that they create and put in the hands of only a few people. We need those buildings, but I think we have to be careful of the scale of them.
All right, talking about scales, that might be a good time for us to take a little break. We are talking to Javier Sánchez, architect from Mexico, who is here in Seattle nowadays. We'll be right back. Hello, everyone. Thanks for listening to Architecture Talk. We release a new conversation every other Wednesday. So, if you're enjoying this conversation, please do be sure to visit our website and to check out some of the earlier conversations. From the website, you can also subscribe to this podcast and you can listen to the other episodes. You can also simply directly subscribe to us via Spotify or via the podcast app. And of course, we are available to be heard via any of the other podcasting apps that are available on the internet, such as Stitcher, Overcast, etc. We would also love to hear from you if you have any questions or just some comments, or even have a suggestion for a future episode. You can reach us via the contacts page on architecturetalk.org. Thank you for listening again. So we're talking to Javier Sanchez, and we're in the middle of a fascinating conversation on architecture and life. And we were just beginning to talk in the break, Javier.
I was telling you that how I don't think there are like coincidences in
So
life.
what happens if it's not a coincidence?
Let me just put this example forward. No, I mean, we meet on the faculty meeting, and you invite me. We go for an Indian lunch, and then tell me about your podcast. Suddenly, I hear the first episode, and you're talking to Gundula Proksh, who's a professor here, and she's presenting her work on urban agriculture, which is part of the topics that I am working with on my studio with my students from here in Seattle, but in Mexico City. So suddenly I'm like, how is this all happening? You know, there are no coincidences. I think life is tricky because you obviously have to decide what you do and what you don't, and what you don't, I think, is the biggest of them. But once you decide what you do, you have to follow that and continue on with that passion until you find the next chain, you know, in that puzzle that is your life. So the fact that we were talking about our parents being architects at the beginning of the talk, and connects back to why I see architecture today through my daughter's eyes, and how I kind of opened my eyes to nature, and now I'm thinking about urban agriculture. You know, is running the culprit of that? Or why did it take me so long to figure that out? It doesn't matter. I think what matters is that today I am here and I'm thinking in a different way. You know, there's this saying about that you will never be the same, and the I don't exactly remember the river will always be different. So you go and see this river, and you're not the same person, and the river is not the same.
Right.
It's always changing, and I think that's the beauty of life.
So, but you also meditate. You practice meditation in some form, yes?
I've been meditating for every day for 2018, and
And how's it connected to your creative practice as an architect?
it makes you stop thinking.
So to design, you have to stop thinking.
You have to stop thinking. I mean, those minutes that a day that you stop your mind, that you put a break on it, they clear your mind. And if you're working on a design, for example, you can do this exercise of before touching the paper and the pencil, you meditate 5 minutes. And you think of nothing. You don't think of what you're going to do. You just think of nothing.
Right.
And then maybe after 5 minutes, you allow your mind to think whatever it thinks.
Yeah.
And then maybe it's not about the project. It doesn't matter, I think. Maybe it's about something else. Maybe it's something mundane and stupid. And then you go back to paper. And I think you have a clear opening to be creative, to think different.
Is that right? Does that work that way? I mean, what is interesting to me here is, meditation is a deep, ancient Indian practice.
Yes.
And you are using it as a technique and a way of being for your practice in Mexico. My father always would tell me the story of this Indian artist, Satish Gujral, who got a fellowship to go to Mexico, I think in the 1950s. And Octavio Paz met him, and all these things. And he came back and he was a transformed muralist. I want you to speculate. I know you've never been to India or even
Not yet.
you've been to Japan. We connect through the West. We connect here in Seattle, or we connect through the great institutions of modernism, or through Corbusier, or Kahn, or Bach. Are there ways you feel one might be missing, or one could be connecting directly between the cultural being of some place like Mexico or Latin America and India and things like that? I mean, do you have any sort of intuitions about that?
I think we live in the world of information. We are able to have a take on whatever topic we want to. Maybe it's not a good information that we can find easily, but we can find information like that about anything. And I think sometimes you have to be ready to take in that information. It's there, but you're not ready. In my case, when you ask me, you haven't gone to India, I have not. I think I'm beginning to be ready to go to India. I really mean that.
We'll go.
I will go. But yes, I think India is able to share with us so much.
No, but what I'm trying to get to, Javier, is my father worked with modernists and Corbusier, and my way of thinking through that inheritance, through the post-colonial inheritance, is so infected with sort of the central big ideas of Western modernism. I imagine probably similar things in Mexico and Latin America. Because of that, is there something we lose that one could have known or known about the world differently? As, for instance, one knows about the world through meditation, as through this extreme running that you are describing. These are different ways of knowing the world. And have you ever felt that there are other ways that you might be tapping into?
In Mexico, I think we were lucky enough to, at some point, become kind of nationalist. We were open to Le Corbusier's ideas.
Mm-hmm.
We have architects that went to work with Le Corbusier. Teodoro González de León came back from working with him. But we did not call him to build. I think what I'm trying to say is that our university city, which is maybe always a reference for me, has this duality between modernism and our the construct of being Mexican, of our part in the world, in the land. It is at the same time pre-Hispanic and modern.
Right.
And I think that kind of syncretism, which also happened in art, because artists were participating in the building of modern Mexico with the architects, in a way created for us some form of disengagement from having Le Corbusier building in Mexico. I think that was in a way probably good for us. I mean, I don't know, good or bad, but it was like that. Doesn't really matter. I think we in Mexico are always more careful of the influence of the US. That's
You're wary of that influence.
when we think about the West, we don't think about the West, we think about the North.
Right. So being here in Seattle, you should be wary of that.
Well, but I think we learn from this possibility of living abroad. It changes us. It affects us in a good way. I have been able to escape from Mexico several times in my life, living abroad. Now, I would say several times, most of them in the US. And every time that I go back to Mexico, I see Mexico from a different point of view, and it helps me reconnect in a stronger way, because that pause allows me to recharge,
But tell me a little bit about. So you said UNAM and sort of, Mexican modernism is a syncretic culture, aesthetic culture. So when you think about pre-colonial native architecture and identity and being in Mexico or in Latin America in general, what does that mean to you? What are the things that come to the mind when you think about that?
We're working with one of our projects here in the studio is with Xochimilco and this island, this man-made island system.
Mhm.
And obviously, when you go 500 years back, you think of how our city was this beauty in the middle of a lake,
Mexico, yes, yes.
and that doesn't exist anymore. But it's something that we carry in our baggage.
What is that carrying? You're carrying what? That memory of that place?
You're carrying this idea of a more ideal world. I think
A lost world?
a lost world, not more than a lost world, a lost connection to nature.
Mm.
I think what we were able to do as a civilization in these amazing cultures in anywhere in the world is not try to dominate nature, which is what we want to do today, but in spite of nature, try to gain from nature. You know what I'm trying to say. Our cities were oriented in a certain way towards the elements, towards the rising sun, towards the energetic points, towards the stars. We were harvesting rainwater. We were using it. We adored the god of rain.
Right.
Now, whenever it rains in Mexico City, we hate rain.
Yeah.
It makes no sense when you have droughts in other parts of the world and people beg for rain, and we have that resource and we throw it away. We throw it away because we are better.
Right. Right.
And I think, no, we are nature. We are nature, and nature is us. And I think that's why I loved your talk with Gondola, because she was talking about that lost connection. So definitely, I think that's probably the most important thing that we tend to look at. We were building these pyramids that were huge in scale, but they were never wanting to be bigger than the mountains.
Right.
they had a limit. So today we want to build larger than mountains, taller than, it's like a competition.
It is a competition.
Why? I mean, what for? What do we gain from that? I think the ego is a problem in our society. And going back to meditation, it kind of suppresses the ego.
Quietens the ego. It shows how the ego is just a mythology.
It's this voice that is important, but you have to edit it, filter it.
I sort of get the word that comes to mind is submission almost to nature rather than conquering. Is that a word?
Exactly, like trying to find some form of calibration, of balance, of in between state. We've gone beyond that. No, today we are out of plastic containers, and when talking again about running, as a runner, you can encounter a river and drink water from it. Where can we do that in a city? One of the joys of being in Rome last year, I was running the Rome Marathon.
I see.
But one of the things that I think was really potent for me was finding sparkling water faucets everywhere. So people would carry their bottles, and it was still and sparkling.
Yes.
Not only still water, I mean, what luxury. In Mexico, we have a big problem with water. So I think that what our politicians should be doing, and us as a society be asking them to do, is to have water. Water water is life. So if they can do it in home, why can't we do it in Mexico?
And why can't we do it everywhere in the world? So let's just switch gears and go to the other end. I want to know a little bit more about how you practice and how you work, and I want to do that by asking you a question which is very important today is, do you work digitally? Do you work with a computer? Do you work with your hand? Are you skeptical of working with a computer, or you think that's the future? What do you think is the relationship of digital thinking to architecture in your life, your work?
I work with a notebook.
A Mac notebook?
It has a grid, a square grid. So I work with square.
Okay, so you work with a real, actual notebook.
I have a notebook. I have a pencil, a lead pencil. I have an eraser, and I have a notebook with a ruler inside that to me is 1 meter or 2 meters or whatever. No. And from that moment on, and obviously I do sketches whenever I'm not thinking. So the notebook is for working in section and working in plan at the same time. When you want to be more, let's say, attractive, your sketches become more attractive, you do a perspective or axonometric or something like that I try to make with my hands. I kind of think, well, I was educated at the point where AutoCAD was already present. But I could tell you that today I know how to use it, but I am kind of afraid of it. I don't use it, and afraid of it not because it has any problems towards me, because I don't know how to use it.
Right.
I have no idea how to use a Revit.
So there's no Revit in your office?
There is, and some people know how to use it. I don't even know what system, what is it. If you ask me what kind of Revit you use, I would have no idea.
And that's by choice. I mean,
that's because I have not enough time. So my time is so limited that I think that I am more effective doing a sketch, making a photograph with my phone of that sketch, sending it over via WhatsApp to one of my colleagues in the office, discussing it, and they take on the task of continuing on with that sketch. And then they send the sketch back, and then I send it back, and that's how I like, and I love to work that way because it's only me, a pencil, and a notebook, and I think that's as atemporal or as timeless as I can get. No, I would love to be able to do a 3D SketchUp of one of my projects. I think it would give me additional tools, but I have to dedicate the time to learn.
Yeah, and you don't have that time. So you don't, as such, have a problem with Revit as a,
No, I don't. I have a problem with people jumping into it without thinking. You know, Juhani Palasma talks about the thinking hand.
Mhm.
I definitely agree with the thinking hand, but I also like to think of the thinking brain, and just this moment that I was describing to you of no thinking and then thinking. Or as one of my best friends and great architect, Sebastián Mariscal, always tells me about writing like a story of how one day goes by in the life of a project, and then he begins working on the project. I mean, I think those kind of ways of thinking are more poetic and more human. They make us not think necessarily about materials and about shapes and about but about the sequences of space, the narrative of a space, where it compresses you, where it opens up,
right.
how the light enters.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I mean, so sort of a more narrative reading of architecture. But the thing that occurred to me is that is there such a thing as a architecture of no thinking? Is there an architecture that comes out of meditation? And perhaps we go back to those Japanese temples we're talking about, those Zen meditation gardens, for instance, in Kyoto. Is one of the reasons, just to speculate, why they are so powerful is because they come out of a meditational tradition.
I mean, I would love to think that they do. Do they?
Well, they're certainly intended to be places of meditation.
Of abstraction.
No, to actually meditate, to sit and meditate.
Yeah, abstract yourself from reality.
Yes, to sort of shut the mind off. And they're designed in a way that is to facilitate you to be able to do that. And then they're also intended to illustrate or be aids to illustrating what it is to know the world through a meditational quiet. Or at least that's my interpretation, or at least the Zen meditation gardens in Kyoto, like the Jinkakuji, Ryon, Kinkakuji, or the Silver Pavilion, Gold Pavilion, or even the smaller gardens which are everywhere. They all seem to be dedicated to the practice and institution of Zen meditation in one way or the other. So, which suggests to me that therefore they can be thought of, at least in part, as architectures of not thinking.
Wow, what a difficult premise. First of all, how do you let go of your travel baggage? That's I think the first problem. How do you unlearn certain techniques, and how do you think from that point on without thinking? No, I mean, because I do think that whatever we do today is influenced by what we have lived and what we want to live. No, and that is influenced by thinking. What I do think would be beautiful is to think of a room that can allow you to not think, to just be. But do you need a room to do that, or?
I don't know if you need a room, but one can think, or at least pose the problem that if one wanted to make an architecture that enables that, or facilitates that, or helps that, or stages that, what would it be? I mean, Corbusier, back to the master, his own room in that corridor, which at his atelier, was a windowless room.
Yeah, it's probably silencing. Like Kant talks a lot about silence, no? Silence and light. Would be beautiful just to do an architecture thinking of that, of silence.
Silence and light.
I think that is already too much, no? I mean, it's a beautiful, poetic idea. Can take you wherever you want.
Talk to me about your favorite or very moving pre-Columbian architectural place in Latin America.
Well, I have been several times to Teotihuacan, and there is this temple inside Teotihuacan, which is the only one that still has the relief inside the walls, and it's an impluvium, so it rains inside this courtyard. It's a small scale courtyard.
Mm-hmm.
So the rain goes into this central court that is one step or two steps below the portico that goes around it. And the idea was that became a mirror to the sky. So they would see the stars
I see.
on that pool.
Uh-huh.
I think that's
Incredible.
we can do that. I mean, it's just a matter of having a silent city that allows us to see the sky.
Without the light pollution.
Just that is so beautiful, no?
It is beautiful. It's like a controlled lake, sort of an architecture of lakeness.
You know that the word you use right now, control?
Yeah.
In that way, I like that word. When we can control nature, guide nature or control it up to that point, no? And then it surprises us because the sky will never be the same, no? It will change.
I mean, control in the sense, Paragon used to talk about types of windows, right? There were windows for looking through, there were windows for letting in light, and there were windows for walking through doors.
More like openings.
And I wonder if, one thinks of architecture as apparatus for knowing and engaging the world, which is a kind of a controlling, but not controlling in the sense of building a dam and, sort of stopping nature and putting it subservient to you. But I mean, we need some way to know the world, whether it's through extreme running or whether it's through framing the view or whether it's through sort of putting a sheet of water inside a courtyard. These are all apparatuses.
Yes.
Filters, lenses, working lenses, to know the world. I could say that's architecture in a good way versus architecture that goes out to sort of conquer nature.
I think you put it beautifully. It is the construction. In Spanish, we have a word that is la mirada.
La mirada.
Mirada meaning, it's not the vision, because vision, I think, is different. Vision is also visión in Spanish, but la mirada is the way one sees. It's your mirada is different from mine.
Right.
It's not seeing, it's what you see, right?
Yeah.
So architecture is kind of like our take on that, no? Nuestra mirada, our look into the world through architecture.
Right. It's kind of like an apparatus for perspective. Is it kind of like perspective, viewpoint?
And that viewpoint is our decision, right? It's as Corbu liked to see his buildings from a certain perspective.
Is it possible for me to see things from your perspective? You talk about seeing the world from your daughter's perspective now.
I think philosophically, of course, because there is a connection, and between friends, I can see the world definitely from your perspective. The closer the friend, the more accurate probably you can do that reading. It's a reading. Maybe our reading of the world is that architecture apparatus, no?
Yes, I like that.
It's the way we read the world, no?
Interpret it.
the way we interpret it. Yes, it's our interpretation. It's a personal take on it.
But in a sort of a physical register, in a physical way. I mean, it's not like a writing a description. It's sort of participating in the world, but participating in the world in a way that produces an interpretation of the world.
Correct. In that way, you could also talk about art, no? Or I mean, you read a book or you see a work of art, and your reading of it will be different than mine. It could coincide or not, but it probably will be also different from the artist's. No, I think that's the beauty of it. That in the end, art makes us view. I mean, engage with art and see it from our own eyes, and the architecture can probably do that as well. No?
Okay, so as we move towards the end here, Javier, so what is architectural teaching for you? What is pedagogy in a studio? How does one teach architecture? I mean, I can talk, we can talk about water harvesting techniques. We can talk about, optimum solar gain, solar shading. What is studio pedagogy?
No, to me, I had an amazing teacher, and he would not like that word that I just used for him. So his name was Humberto Recalde, and he would say that we do not teach architecture; we learn architecture, and he meant that we learn together.
Yes.
And I think that's the way. I am here because I want to learn.
Yes.
And learning through creating an idea for a project, but I really have no idea where we will end by June 4th. And I'm so happy about that because I have really no idea. And I am probably a more easygoing professor in the way that I tell them how I see a problem, but then it's their problem. And if they engage with that problem, they can modify the problem. But then once it's theirs, they have to come up with a solution to that problem. And they have to find a site that exemplifies that solution. And it's all open. So we're building a project as we go. We began only with a provocation. And the provocation in this case was about earthquakes.
Right.
And we are working with water instead. I mean, we are working with earthquakes because the soil in Mexico City is so damaged by the drainage of water out of the aquifer that it produces problems for the earthquakes. So they are related, but in the end, what we have to do is not build stronger buildings only. We have to replenish our aquifers. That's as important as the other, because what happens to the old buildings? We're just merciless. Whoever has the money to re-engineer their structure will be saved. It's horrible, no? So to me, I am not a continuous teacher or learner because I have decided up to now to work more as a professional from my office perspective. But I was telling my wife the other day, Lorena, that I do see myself in the near future doing this kind of a learning process more often.
Uh-huh.
The last time I did this was in 2013 in Manhattan, Kansas, and from there I've done a lecture here and there, a visiting critic, that kind of thing continuously. But the fact that I can take time to move out, to be in a new place, that's what's so rich about this experience for me. So, and that's what I take back, that and new friends like you and old friends like Rob Hutchison. I mean, I come back to Seattle and I have so many friends.
Yes.
I don't have so many friends in New York City, and I lived there for a year. And you know why is that? Because New York is a place of change.
Right.
And I think people in Seattle have so much things to stay for. You know, this city, this beautiful paradise that you have of nature. It's difficult to leave from here, I guess. But anyway, that's something that enriches my life.
Well, welcome to Seattle, Javier.
Thank you, Vikram, and this has been amazing being here with you.
Thank you for being on Architecture Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening to Architecture Talk. This is Vikram Prakash. I am the host of the show, and our show's producer is Elizabeth Umbenhauer. If you like the show, please do remember to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. And also take a moment and rate us on iTunes. Thank you very much, and see you next time.